All right, I want to touch on the boxer show that we had last night, and I don't really want to go through the card as a whole and talk about each fight because I'm going to do that on Review of the Week, which will obviously come tomorrow. It's more a, how would I describe it? A critique, criticism. What would you really describe it at this point? But it just seems to be a recurring theme with boxing on Sky Sports these days, that these shows are very forgettable. They're not really the most entertaining shows in the world. I've said this for a while about boxing on Sky Sports. Even in the shows where they've had a couple of good little scraps, there's a very, people in the comment section have said the same. Something just feels off about the show. I'm not talking about the fighters. I'm not talking about the pundits. I'm talking about the show as a whole. The whole product, so to speak. Something just does. It feels void of any fun. The fight, I think maybe that is seeping into the fights because we're seeing lackluster fights as well. It just seems void of anything. Void of any fun. Void of any, banter. It's there on comms. The fights tend to be, lackluster. The main event wasn't too bad. Meyer versus Tasha Jonas. But in terms of the undercard, you saw Zach Chelly versus Jack Cullen. That was a rematch from their fight at Fight Camp a couple of years ago, and I remember that fight. It was a horrible decision. Zach Chelly won the fight, but it ended up being a draw. That fight was more compelling, that was more entertaining, and that was in Eddie Hearn's back garden than this, which had attendance in. And on the undercard as well, Artenstall, meh. That was a real kind of meh fight. And then you had that Jermaine Brown versus Mark Jeffers. I think that's how you say that guy's name. That, again, was another snooze fest. It wasn't great. It wasn't the worst, but it wasn't great. It's strange. It's strange that boxing on Sky, we're seeing it really, I would even argue it's on its last legs. In fact, I would even go as far as say it might, not British boxing. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm not talking about British boxing. I'm talking about boxing on Sky. Maybe, and I say may, it may very well be going to, if it's not already there, in a worse place than it was back in, say, 2011, 2012, kind of 2011, when it was really in a bad place following on from the David Hay Audley Harrison debacle, which, that really put, Sky didn't do pay-per-view for a while after that. It was a real bad time for them. And if I look back to those fights back then, those cards I should say, before Hearn took over as the permanent promoter on Sky for the best part of 10 years, you kind of had a bit of everyone. It was a revolving door. You had Mick Hennessy, I think, did shows on there. Barry Hearn and Eddie Hearn did shows on there when they were starting back Matchroom Boxing. Warren was doing shows. Maloney was doing shows. Dave Colwell even ran a couple of shows on there, if you may remember, back in the day, on Sky Sports. Some of them were domestic dusts up. They had them Friday fight night, stuff like that. If you remember that very famous knockout, remember Uzi Ahmed, the guy who did the Prince Nazim entrance to the ring, that I actually remember him saying this, that the entrance that you see in the YouTube vid, that was a fight he had, oh Lord, I can't remember his name, was it Chris Edwards or something like that? It was the British flyweight champ at the time. And he went 12 rounds in that fight, credit to him. That was the entrance for that fight, where he did the real flashy Prince Nazim entrance. But the actual knockout was from the Ashley Sexton fight, which was a different fight. It was a different entrance for a different fight. But I remember that very well. And they were on, I think they were Maloney cards, and they were on Friday fight nights back in 2010. And looking back now, those cards weren't too bad. There wasn't much on offer, but there wasn't much on offer. The domestic scene, the UK boxing, the domestic scene was alright back then, but the UK boxing scene wasn't great. You had the Carl Froch, but they weren't at the superstar level it took for him going through the Super 6 and then, obviously having his run as IBF champion. It took him and George Groves. Joshua was an amateur at the time. Tyson Fury had come out off the back of those performances against John McDermott, wasn't looking amazing, wasn't much taught to hit. It was a real weird time in British boxing. There wasn't really any big stars, any big names, but the cards were still going on. They were still doing them. Then Eddie Hearn takes over full time. But you got to remember, when he started off out at Sky, he didn't have a budget like Ben Shalom. Like, it's really crazy that Ben Shalom has come in and he's been able to just get a big budget off the bat and be able to put these, well, earlier on back at the time he was able to put some fights on. Now it's a lot more, it's not as good now as it was It wasn't great when he started, but at least he was doing something. But with Eddie Hearn, he was doing those prize fighter tournaments. Do you remember them? That's primarily what he was doing. You look back at, when I do those WTF videos, career reviews, you look back at some of the old cards and some of the names that were on it. You know, you look at Kell Brook, he would have been on undercards of, you know, people like, I think, Anthony Crawler at one stage, or they certainly shared cards. There was a lot of names on the old cards, on the Queensbury shows, on the Matchroom shows. But you look back at them as a whole, and they weren't amazing. You know, even up as far back as, say, 2016, 2017. Look at some of those Eddie Hearn shows that weren't, you know, sold as the big events, just the generic Saturday fight nights when he was only doing the UK scene. They weren't amazing, some of them. You know, he was kind of having to put his budget on the big fights and the really small shows, which I guess today you would class them as next gens. Even then you weren't doing that. They weren't amazing. He had some great cards, but he had some lackluster ones, as did Warren. But it wasn't consistently lackluster. And again, at the time, Joshua wasn't there. You really only had Carl Froch. Kell Brook was only in his early stages. He didn't even have a world champ title or anything like that. And again, Hearn didn't have a massive budget, was just doing those prize fighters, but it got bigger and bigger and bigger. I think he'd done his last prize fighter show in 2015, and then, you know, the shows, they got increasingly bigger, and then obviously went to the Zone, and he left Sky. Since then, they've got Ben Shalom in, who, at the start, I actually thought at the start he was making some good moves. He was signing a lot of the guys from the most recent Olympics. In interviews, he wasn't coming across as the most charismatic guy in the world, certainly not. But in one sense, you could argue that was kind of good. It meant that, you know, the fighters would get the most attention. But I don't know, there just seemed something off with him. He was saying some good things in interviews, though, like the Josh Taylor Jack Catterall card. I think he handled that very well. Very well. He handled that whole card exceptionally well. And Ben Shalom at that point, early 2022, was starting to make a few moves. You had fighters signing with him. You had Jack Catterall signing with him, Michael Hunter, Hughie Fury, who I believe is still a boxer fighter, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm thinking of others as well, Joe Parker. So he was getting these guys in and he was signing them. He wasn't even at Sky a year, he was signing these guys. But then you start to see the crack show. Because it's one thing to sign Olympians or, you know, high-level amateurs on the GB squad who've never had a promoter and they're only signing with Boxer and Ben Shalom. Sorry if you heard that noise, it's really raining heavy outside and you can hear the sound coming in. But he was signing guys who, you know, as I said, they've no experience of, you know, what this promoter was like to deal with, what that promoter was like. But the ones who did, the Jack Catteralls of the world, the Michael Hunters, the Joe Parkers, they got out of Dodge very quick. In Jack Catterall's case, he got out of Dodge before even making his debut. That kind of shows, at least tells me that someone like Catterall, who would work with Warren in the past, went to boxer Ben Shalom thinking, okay, this is going to be good. Oh, wow. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. That's how it looks to me, considering you with Warren, you go to box, you don't even debut with him, and you jump ship to Eddie Hearn instantly. It's like something's not right there if Jack Catterall is doing that. And you're seeing other fighters as well. They're coming and they're straight away going. His choice of fighter who he's signing, no disrespect to Lawrence Okoli, but to say he's going to be the face of Sky, I'm sure Lawrence Okoli didn't even believe that, you know, when he said that. And the performances he's put on, I look at the money he put into Okoli and I think that could have been gone. That could have went, no, again, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way to Okoli, but that could have went under different fighters who could have done much better. To even insinuate Sam Egerton isn't entertaining enough to be on Sky is completely ridiculous. I mean, I'll take it from Hatman, what brand of crack are you smoking? Sam Egerton couldn't be in a boring fight if you try it. Whether he wins or loses, you look at those fights and you're like, that was fun, I enjoyed that. Couldn't be in a boring fight if you tried. Go and sit through David like Lawrence Okoli, please. I wouldn't put my worst enemy through having to watch that fight. So Ben Shalom at the head of the helm, something has really gone amiss there. And, you know, Adam Smith, his influence, whether you like Adam Smith or don't, at the end of the day, the guy does know boxing. He's been part of Sky for decades. And I wonder, I've heard long before Adam Smith left Sky, or had that year break from Sky, where he was obviously ill, that there was creative differences even going back to summer 2022. And that was when Adam Smith was still commentating, still working for Sky Sports. That to me was strange, because I actually did think kind of they would be singing off the same hymn sheet. Apparently not. And we see now that Adam Smith is gone. The product wasn't amazing, but let's say the product was kind of, it was all going on. Oh, that's what it was like. It wasn't going up, it wasn't going down. It was just kind of going, and then boom. As soon as he left, it just went like that, downhill. And if anything, it's got worse and worse and worse. And I think last night's show is indication of that. Coming up in a fortnight, we have Boazzi versus Aziz. They've had to push that fight back already. Some say it was genuine due to an injury. Others say it was poor ticket sales. It's moved to a smaller arena. The OVO is smaller than the O2. I do wonder what does the future hold for boxing on Sky. I really did think at the time Sky would keep boxing on board, but they would do what they did back in the day. Open it up to promoters. Anyone wants to come in, you can come in. Because to me that just made the most sense. Out of Hearn and Warren, who have their stables sewed up, they have their broadcasters, they have their thing. They're dealing with the Saudis now as well. So they're kind of... How would you... I would like being in a boxing division, like the welterweight division before Crawford fought Spence. You have those two guys and then the rest underneath. Just kind of jostling for position, who's going to come out on top. I think Sky should have done something like that. Let them all just work with us. Hopefully then it might be easier to get fights between this network, or not this network, this promoter, that promoter, these small hall. You look at is it JBM or something like that they're called. They work with TalkSport. They're putting on good little small hall shows. They're streaming them to YouTube. I think Boxing King Media streamed them to YouTube. They're doing fine work. I don't see why Sky couldn't just open up and say, right, you can come in, you can have a Friday fight night, you can have a Sunday fight, you can have this. I don't see why they wouldn't do that. I think that made a lot of sense. I think Shalom, the experience or the experiment, he's got another year apparently left of his contract, has not worked, and it ain't gonna work. And I think Ben Shalom, unlike Eddie Hearn, they're both rich kids who, been put in that position. At least with Hearn, he was able to see how his dad did things. His dad ran the boxing for many years in the 1990s. He was able to get an idea of what and Barry Hearn, to his credit, he does know what the fan wants. He was able to look at darts and say, got something here, strikes a chord with the working man. And if you think about it, like darts and boxing, they're two very much working man's games. And Barry and Eddie Hearn have been, instrumental in their success. And they get it. They get what the casual fan wants to see. Ben Shalom doesn't get that. Ben Shalom thinks like, I'm assuming this is what he must think, like, oh, I like these, loud characters like that Big Mo guy doing the announcements. The fans are going to love that. And he's an influencer. The fans are going to like, oh, they don't like it? What the hell? What's going on? But me and all my friends like it. Do the fans not like? No, they don't, Ben. We're not all like you. We like seeing good fights. We don't give a damn about the story. Oh yeah, this fighter here, he came from this thing, and we're going to do a big segment on this. Don't care. Is he a good fighter? Can he fight? Well, let's find out. That's what we want to see. I think that's where Ben Shalom is missing it. Bit of a long-winded one here. Let me know your thoughts. I just thought that show last night was not good. Not very good, and it wasn't just the fight. I feel for the fighters in one sense, because you're kind of looking at them thinking, it's not necessarily the fighter's fault. I think the whole product needs a big overhaul, big time. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed it, people. Smash the like button if you could, and subscribe, of course, if you haven't already. For now, I will leave it with that. Peace.